the Speaker's announced policy of January 3rd, 2013, the gentlewoman from New York, Ms. Ming, is recognized for 60 minutes as the designee of the Minority Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks and include extraneous material on the subject of my special order.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, as we gather this evening to discuss anti-Semitism, it is a plague that has ravaged the world for thousands of years. Yet in the last few weeks, it has reared its ugly head globally in a way we have not seen in a long time. It is truly shocking. From Berlin to New York, we're hearing chants of "Gas the Jews." And this is not hyperbole. We are actually hearing chants of "Gas the Jews" around the world. And these are not isolated incidents. We are seeing hundreds and thousands of people rallying and sometimes attacking synagogues in Europe. It's one thing to protest against events going on in the Middle East, but there is simply no justification and no reason for doing it right outside any Jewish place of worship. These are brazen acts of anti-Semitism. Now, I cannot possibly understand anti-Semitism to the same extent as my Jewish friends, but I think it's crucial that non-Jews speak out forcefully against this disease, because to effectively combat anti-Semitism, we need non-Jews to step up and also lead on this issue. I'd like to focus my remarks today on 2 related issues, the international and domestic dimensions of anti-Semitism. With regard to anti-Semitism beyond our borders, I would like to focus on one case, that of France. I'm focusing on France because I think it is really the front line right now in the war against global anti-Semitism. And I think it's an instructive case for how policy leaders here can face this issue. In France right now, there is a war. On the one hand, we see some of the most widespread and atrocious acts of anti-Semitism. But on the other hand, we see a government, most particularly the Prime Minister Valls, acting forcefully against anti-Semitism. The words and actions of the French government, most particularly Mr. Valls' recent assertions that anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism, are unprecedented and should be acknowledged as such. So what we have here are 2 sides: virulent anti-Semites on one side, and on the other, a democratically elected government that appears resolved to take them on. Rather than throw our hands in the air and say that France is a horribly anti-Semitic place and that all the Jews should leave, we ought to get in this fight. Anti-Semitism is a complicated issue, not a black and white issue. Yes, France has a deep history of anti-Semitism, but it is also a country that has had a Jewish president and one that nearly elected another a couple years ago. It has the 3rd largest Jewish population in the world, and there's a reason for that. It is also a country that historically has proven itself capable of changing. We need to recognize this history and work with France's leadership and civil society to fight this battle and remain hopeful. What happens here will, I believe, affect the future of the Jewish people. This brings me to the domestic dimension of our problem. We obviously have anti-Semitism in this country as well, although not to the degree we see it in Europe. It is essential that Jews and non-Jews speak about this problem to their own communities, and we have to continue to encourage that here in Congress. In New York, Mr. Jeffries and I are leading a program whereby Jewish, Asian, and African American college students are gathering to discuss foreign policies and the perspectives of their respective communities in relation to key foreign policy issues. We must speak regularly about Israel, BDS, and other issues of importance to our Jewish friends and neighbors, not just when there is a major international incident. The reason I say this because it's also far easier to hate someone you don't know than to hate someone that you do know. Mr. Speaker, as we head into the August recess, I urge my colleagues of all stripes to discuss the dangers of anti-Semitism with their communities and to build bridges between communities, so that we may reduce hatred and bigotry. I also urge my colleagues as statesmen and women to engage the international community in a positive way on this issue and believe in and fight for a Europe and world of lesser anti-Semitism. With that, I'd like to yield to gentle lady from Florida, Miss Debbie Wasserman Schultz, the first Jewish woman from Florida elected to Congress, a tireless advocate and one of the great Jewish leaders of our time.
I thank the gentlelady from New York particularly for her leadership in stepping up and bringing to the floor of the United States House of Representatives the incredibly important topic of anti-Semitism, not just nationally but globally, because much of the conflict that exists worldwide today, unfortunately, stems from poisonous anti-Semitism. The gentlelady from New York represents the district that my parents grew up in, and neighborhoods and communities with a proud Jewish immigrant tradition, and also represents a community that in the Asian American community that has come and joined that proud and vibrant ethnic community of immigrants who have contributed so much to the United States' rich tapestry of diversity. And it's diversity that we celebrate. But unfortunately, it's not diversity or difference that everyone celebrates, as we've seen with the precipitous and poisonous rise in anti-Semitism. So from the bottom of my heart, as a Jew, and as the representative of a significant Jewish population myself, thank you so much for your leadership in bringing this important issue to the floor of the House of Representatives, because it's only through shining a light on anti-Semitism that we are going to be able to help educate people and fight back. And I rise today, Mr. Speaker, to condemn the alarming increase of anti-Semitism that we've witnessed over the last few weeks. While the Anti-Defamation League released a terrifying report just last month about anti-Semitism growing throughout the world, tragically, my own constituents have personally experienced terrifying and heinous crimes against them just this past week. On Monday morning, congregants and neighbors were horrified to find that swastikas had been spray painted on the walls of Torah V'Emunah Synagogue in Miami-Dade County. In Miami Beach over the weekend, a Jewish couple found their car had been egged and the words Hamas and Jew had been smeared on their car. These deplorable acts are atrocious and despicable. For all of us who care about the rights of minority populations in this country, who celebrate the rich diversity that makes up our great nation, we cannot and we must not be silent. It is amazing to many of us that these actions are occurring in 2014, not in 1930 Nazi Germany. But unfortunately, we're also witnessing what Anti-Defamation League director and Holocaust survivor Abe Foxman recently called the worst anti-Semitism since World War II. In France, as the gentlelady from New York detailed, in an episode that is chillingly reminiscent of Kristallnacht, we witnessed angry rioters throw firebombs at synagogues and ransack and destroy Jewish-owned businesses. In Belgium, a cafe actually publicly displayed a sign saying dogs were allowed in the cafe, but Jews were not. Thankfully, we have seen the leaders of European countries, including Germany, France, and Italy, condemn this kind of behavior. There are countless voices across Europe speaking up in the face of barbarism. But this anti-Semitism is real. This hatred is real, and the violence is real. Many not close to this issue may ask why. To us, it's very clear. This recent surge of anti-Semitism is born out of knee-jerk, vitriolic reaction to the conflict raging in Israel and Gaza. But this conflation of anti-Semitism with the recent actions of Israel in defense of her people is completely misplaced. Israel's actions are a direct response against rocket attacks from a terrorist organization whose stated mission is Israel's destruction and who thrives on a continuing narrative of anti-Semitism and hatred. Unfortunately, we only see a few lone voices around the world protesting against a Hamas government that knowingly and willingly puts its citizens, its children, in harm's way, placing them in jeopardy and sacrificing their lives to engender sympathy for their evil cause. We hear little from much of the world against a terrorist organization that chose to invest in rockets and building tunnels for plotting murderous attacks against innocent civilians instead of investing in homes and schools and hospitals for its citizens. Instead of condemning these cowardly practices by Hamas, we have, however, seen people rage equally against Israel, Israelis, and Jews anywhere. The words and phrases that these protesters are using cannot be spoken on this House floor. They have been dug up from the worst episodes of human history. That is why I am proud to stand with my colleagues tonight, to stand with President Obama and Secretary Kerry and send a clear message that these actions will not be tolerated. We must stand by the commitments we made as a community and as the world to never again stand silent in the face of this kind of horror, this kind of bigotry, this kind of injustice. We will not stand idly by as vitriolic speech turns into violence against innocent people. Never again. Thank you, and I yield back my time to the gentlelady and appreciate once again her time.
With that, I'd like to yield to my friend, Mr. Deutch of Florida, a ranking member of the Subcommittee of Middle East and North Africa, a mentor on many of those issues, and a good friend and a fellow Wolverine, a tireless fighter and defender of Israel. Mr. Deutch.
Thank you. Thank you to my friend from New York, Ms. Meng. I appreciate very much your dedicating this hour to this important topic. I appreciate your leadership. I'm proud to be here with you. I'm proud to be here with my friend and my neighbor from Florida, Ms. Wasserman Schultz, a powerful and eloquent spokeswoman on these issues that mean so much, not just to the Jewish community, but to all of America. And I am glad to be here with you to condemn the increase of anti-Semitism around the world. Anti-Semitism isn't a new issue faced by Jews. For centuries, Jews have been targeted, persecuted, sometimes by their governments, sometimes by their neighbors, used as scapegoats for economic downturns and disasters, and commonly accused of being disloyal to their home country. But this hatred, unfortunately, is far from gone. It continues in a range of manifestations, from Holocaust denial to suspicion of Jewish influence over international affairs, and tragically even in the shooting of innocent Jews. In recent days, we've seen a new face on this age-old bigotry. We're seeing demonstrations around the world that claim to be protesting Israel's actions against Hamas, but too easily and far too often, political opposition to Israel's policies and actual hatred toward Jews are conflated and are indistinguishable. It's clear, unfortunately, that many people are using the current conflict, a facade of anti-Zionism or anti-Israel sentiment, as a thin veil to cover up a much more deep-seated hatred toward Jews. Let me be clear. It moves far beyond a political statement when your intention is to incite violence and to incite violence against Jewish targets especially. Since the military operation began on July 8th, over 100 anti-Semitic incidents have been reported in the United Kingdom alone. On July 18th, 4 teenagers assaulted a rabbi in Gateshead. In Belfast, separately, a synagogue was damaged when bricks were thrown through the windows. France has also experienced a significant number of incidents across the country. In Sarcelles, a kosher store was the target of a Molotov cocktail. Last month, 2 Jews were sprayed with tear gas. In Paris, 2 synagogues were attacked on July 13th while the mob chanted, "Death to the Jews." In Toulouse, Molotov cocktails were thrown at a Jewish community center, though thankfully the attacker missed the target. Particularly in Toulouse, these incidents evoke memories of the awful shooting that happened 2 years ago when 3 Jewish children and a teacher were shot and killed at a Jewish day school. In Germany, long touted, appropriately so, for its extensive protective policies against anti-Semitism, Jews are witnessing anti-Semitic slogans and chants that seem so out of date and out of place Only a few days ago, a Jewish man wearing a yarmulke was assaulted on the streets in Berlin and hit in the face. In Essen, a group of anti-Israel protesters reportedly on their way to attack a synagogue were arrested for conspiracy to commit a crime. And the statements, the screaming. In Frankfurt, you Jews are beasts. In Paris, death to the Jews. In Gelsenkirchen, Germany, chants of Hamas, Hamas, Jews to the gas. All over the world, not just statements, but the vitriol found on social media as well is not only abhorrent, it is chilling. But these incidents, as my colleagues have described, are not taking place only abroad. Just this past weekend, as my friend from Florida related, a synagogue in her district was vandalized with the word Hamas and swastikas spray painted on the front columns. Nearby, a Jewish family woke up to find one of their cars completely covered in eggs, and on the other car was written Jew and Hamas. Yesterday, outside my own office in Boca Raton, Florida, during a rally, a few angry individuals screamed, "Throw the Jews into the sea." And a former employee of mine recently posted a story, an occurrence that happened to him last weekend. He said, "Today I was walking home alone from synagogue, minding my own business. When I got to the crosswalk, I waited for the light to turn so I could cross safely. While waiting, a car pulled up in front of me where a young man rolled down the window and yelled, 'Jew, Hitler was right,' and then drove off." I remind you, this was not at a rally, he said. I was wearing a yarmulke, I was walking from synagogue, I was enjoying Shabbat. There are many more examples domestically, including a Jewish summer camp in California where graffiti was found that read, "Jews equals killers," and Jews are children killers. It's unacceptable that radical groups have used the conflict between Israel and Hamas as pretext for their own anti-Semitism. Last month, I proudly joined my colleagues in a letter to Secretary Kerry, urging the State Department's continued focus on combating anti-Semitism worldwide. Now, I applaud the statements of condemnation by European leaders, including those in France, in Germany, and Italy, and their stated commitment to ensuring the safety of their own communities is to be admired. But there is more that needs to be done to rid societies of this baseless hatred toward Jews. A number of Jewish leaders in the U.S., Europe, and Israel have expressed serious concern about the rise of the number of incidents in hate speech and violence, and many believe that this animosity has risen to the worst levels seen since the Holocaust. We must continue to speak out on these issues, which is why I'm so grateful to have this opportunity tonight. We have to use this opportunity to educate and to combat anti-Semitism in all of its forms. When we combat anti-Semitism, we stand not just against hatred for the Jews, we stand against hatred. And it affects not just the Jews, but when we stand against anti-Semitism and we speak out against hatred, ultimately every minority group that is the target of hatred, every one of those groups benefits from our willingness to speak out. I'm glad to have that opportunity to do that here on the floor tonight. And with that, I again would like to thank my friend Ms. Meng for bringing us together today, and I will yield back.
In conclusion, we stand today united as a Congress to condemn acts of anti-Semitism through the world and right here in our communities. Hate is never the answer. We must always speak up. I'd like to end by reciting a well-known poem by Martin Niemöller. First they came for the socialists, and I did not speak out because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionists, and I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me. Thank you, and I yield back.